This is the Right Guys podcast, where the Second Amendment is absolute. And now your hosts, Josh Hammerling and Max McGuire.
Welcome back to another edition of the Right Guys podcast. My name is Max McGuire.
I'm Josh Hammerling. Woo! So we're kind of at odds with each other today. I mean, there's a little bit that, we're having a hard time disagreeing on this one. And I think folks are really going to open their eyes up once we just start talking about it. So let's start the discussion. Kick us off, Max. Kick us off.
Sure, we'll kick it right off. An Illinois judge has held that the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, which protects the right of the people to keep and bear arms, applies to illegal aliens as well. And specifically, they are talking about this section, 922G of the U.S. Code, G5, which says anyone who is an alien who is illegally or unlawfully in the United States, it's unlawful for them to possess, buy, transfer, yada, 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 a firearm. So I have to look at it. I haven't looked at it completely, but I'm curious, do we know whether this ruling applies to all illegal aliens, or did she rule that as it applies to this case? Because that's something that they've been doing a lot lately.
Yeah, well, either way, it sets kind of a precedence, right? It means that anybody who enters the U.S., the way I'm understanding it, I could be totally wrong, but the way I'm understanding it is they would be within their right as a people inside the United States to keep and bear arms, which totally blows my mind because the very first act that they do when they cross our border is they commit a crime, right? And typically they will get arrested for it. They will get their arrest papers, yada, yada, yada. So the moment they cross the border, they're already committing a crime. I just find that to be a hard pill to swallow, Max. What are you saying?
Here's the part that I was just mentioning. So what a lot of judges are doing when it comes to tackling Section 922 of the U.S. Code, which deals with gun control laws, who is and who isn't a prohibited person, they're not striking down the whole law. They don't quite have the cojones to do that. Mm-hmm. Instead, what they're doing is right here, I just highlighted it. Thus, this court finds that as applied to Carbajal Flores, Section 922G5 is unconstitutional. Now, that doesn't toss it all out, right? But that says that as it's applied to this defendant, it was unconstitutional. There have been a couple other holdings similar as it relates to people who are past drug addicts. Courts have held that no, just because they did drugs a while ago doesn't mean that they're forever barred from owning a gun. But instead of tossing out the entire statute, they've said that as it applies to this one defendant, we found it's unconstitutional. So what they're setting up is basically you have to go defendant by defendant, case by case, to decide whether or not it does or does not jive with the Second Amendment. None of these judges have the cojones to say it's all unconstitutional, right? Because they
don't want to do that. It's not part of the
and they don't want to do it. They don't want to do that unless they're forced to. They don't want it.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one.
It's a hard pill to swallow for me, man. It just is.
Well, I'm a Second Amendment absolutist.
Yeah.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Who are the people? Right? Like, this is what it comes down to. Define the people. Is that citizens of the United States? Is that people who just inhabit the land? Is the people that are
the people
found
who are here
on a census, right? Like, does the census mean that if those people are there, they are the people, and they have the people the right to bear arms, and it shall not be infringed? So, I mean, that's going to be the argument. It's going to be the argument over language. What does people mean? Does it mean to be citizen if you're people? Because if you move in the U.S. and you settle and suddenly you're a people of the United States, by this reasoning, it gives you de facto citizenship.
So the question is, I mean, rather than diving into what is or is not a people, let's look at the Fourth Amendment. There are three places that the right of the people is found in the Constitution. The First Amendment, the right of the people to peaceably assemble. Second Amendment, right of the people to keep and bear arms. And then the Fourth Amendment here, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. So those are the three places that they talk about the people in the Bill of Rights. The people. The question is, if you had an illegal alien in a house, would police officers have the right just to walk in their front door, ransack their house, steal their papers, right? Generally, the answer is no. Now, they could have a warrant, and that's one thing. But without a warrant, it would generally be considered unconstitutional for them to just kick down a door simply because they suspect someone might be an illegal alien, especially if you're talking about local police who don't have jurisdiction over federal immigration law, at least yet, until this Texas case gets worked out.
Yeah, right.
If a bunch of illegal aliens are marching in the streets for La Raza, right, they're peaceably assembling, unless it turns into a fiery but peaceful protest, would police have the right to round everyone up and arrest them for protesting? Generally, the answer would be no. Now, that's not to say that these people shouldn't be prosecuted for illegal entry, prosecuted for committing all the other host of crimes that they commit, that you have to commit to live in the United States illegally. Because it's not just one crime, it's countless other crimes. But generally, if they're in the United States, they would fall under the definition of the people. Now, this is something that if we want to work out, we have to work it out, right?
Yeah.
Because this is another problem with the census. The census doesn't count citizens. It doesn't count citizens plus lawful residents. The census counts people. So that's the other problem here, right? So if we want to fix this, then you need a constitutional amendment. You need it. But the problem is you open that can of worms, you don't know what you're going to come out with.
Yep.
You launch a constitutional convention, there's no telling what that convention is going to come out with.
Especially with all the Dems stacking everything up, man. That's a dual-edged sword here, right? Because now anybody can move in, have a right to a firearm, and as anything, when the people are armed, the government's abilities to elbow them and stiff arm them diminishes, right? I mean, that's the point of the armed citizenry, is to protect themselves from corrupt government. So at that point, they're deciding the outcomes of American citizens who are the taxpayers of this country.
Yeah. The problem with this ruling is that the way we look at illegal aliens, we believe that they should already be disqualified because the vast majority of them are, in our minds, fugitives from justice. Because right above the bit about you can have a gun unless you're an illegal alien, right above it, 922G2, you can't own a firearm, possess a firearm, transfer if you're a fugitive from justice. Now, how does the law define fugitive from justice?
Yeah.
The law defines a fugitive from justice as any person who has fled from any state to avoid prosecution for a crime or to avoid giving testimony in any criminal proceeding. So the problem is, the vast majority of illegal aliens don't fall under the heading of fugitive from justice because this country treats most cases of illegal immigration as a civil violation. Now, repeat offenders, people who have been deported before and reoffend, they commit felonies. Those are criminal offenses. But someone who crosses the U.S.-Mexico border for the first time illegally, unless they have some other aggravating factors, generally, it's not treated as a felony. And so that's the rub. People are saying like, oh, it's ridiculous. The left is making fun of conservatives, saying, oh, I thought you were for the Second Amendment. You don't like it now. I guess we need to change the Second Amendment. No, the solution is we have to change immigration law.
Yeah.
Because, here's the other hypothetical. Let's talk about this other hypothetical. You know that illegal alien, as we've talked about on the show, an illegal alien doesn't have to just enter the United States illegally. They could also just have their visa expire.
Sure.
So suppose there's someone here on a visa, and let's say they own a gun for protection. They live in a really bad neighborhood. Someone breaks into their mailbox, and they never get the application to renew their visa. Their visa expires. Should they be thrown in prison the very next day after their visa expires for unlawfully possessing a gun? You see, that's where you hope that's where you hope that the umbrella of the people would protect them in that instance, right? Because technically, one day expired on your visa, you become an illegal alien.
This is a really touchy one. I mean, I'm all for the people to bear arms, but I also don't want an invading army coming over the border,
Oh
arming
no.
themselves
Oh no.
up. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
of course
Like,
not. Of course not.
yeah.
But that's the thing though. Like it kind of comes down to intent. It kind of comes down to criminal history. The hypothetical I just gave you of a law-abiding visa holder owning a gun for protection and their visa lapsing, they're not engaged in criminal activity, right? But
Generally not.
an illegal alien who illegally immigrates to the United States, they have to commit another host of crimes. It's uncountable the number of crimes they would need to commit on a day-to-day basis to stay living in the United States illegally. How are they going to get a bank account? How are they going to hold a job, right? All of these different crimes almost always involve fraud, identity theft. I mean, just look at what's happening. Squatting. Look what's happening in New York with petty theft, crime, stealing things, burglary. That is a different case. That's a different case.
Yeah.
So the solution is to fix our immigration laws and to treat illegal immigration as a crime. Because then, and also to amend the kind of definition of a fugitive from justice, right? A fugitive from justice, someone who's avoiding prosecution for a crime, they would have to be indicted first, right? What about someone who flees a police officer, flees Border Patrol? Technically, under the definition right now, until they're indicted, they don't qualify as a fugitive from justice. But in our mind, it checks the boxes, right? They've committed a crime and they're fleeing being held accountable for that crime. So the way to fix this is not to change the Second Amendment. Don't touch the Second Amendment, because the safeguards, it's there for a reason, right? It's to fix our immigration law and to fix our laws surrounding what is and is not a fugitive from justice.
Well, that's going to have to start with actually enforcing the laws that are on the books. First off, if that was done, this probably wouldn't be coming up as an issue right now, right? We also wouldn't see potentially 23 new district seats and all the people that have walked in, right? I mean, if we had enforced those laws to begin with, we wouldn't even be in this boat, which is a farce in itself. And now we've got all these legal questions that are starting to pop up over like who the people are. What does that mean? What does citizenship mean, right? What is an actual crime that makes you a fugitive from the law? And how are these people getting guns, Max? Like when I go to get my background check, I have to present my papers in order to exercise my right? Who you are, where I live, and are you actually you? Are you a fugitive from justice, XYZ, all those questions, right? I have to fill them out. And if any of them come back wrong or somebody's used my name, I can get denied that cell, right? In that moment. So what store do these illegals walk into and buy a gun from?
Interesting question. How could someone possibly pass a background check? Because as we've covered on the show before, we know that when these illegal aliens are caught and they're fraudulently claiming asylum, because we've covered this, the conditions in South America and Central America, for the most part, do not exist for them to qualify for bona fide asylum. They're literally committing asylum fraud en masse. How do they qualify? Well, we know when that catch and release happens, the federal government is allowing them to use their arrest paperwork, their apprehension paperwork from Border Patrol as their ID. So when they go through TSA at the airport, they don't need to have a passport. They don't need to have a driver's license. They are allowing them onto the plane simply by showing the paper that says they've been arrested for illegally entering the United States. So what I want to know is, let's stretch this out more.
Yeah.
Can an illegal alien walk into a gun store and legally buy a gun if the only piece of identification they have is the federal government saying you've broken the law and we've caught you?
My identification is the proof of my crime.
Yes.
And that's what I'm using to go and purchase a firearm. Yes. Now, if we want to be really, I mean, then why have the background check to begin with then? Because if a criminal can walk in and purchase a gun, why can't I walk into and not have to fill out anything else myself? I have a right to that weapon. It should just be cash and carry. Here's my money. Thank you for my gun. But here in Colorado, I gotta wait 3 days. If I misspell the name, it turns you down.
Yep.
If I mischeck a box, right? If my address does not match my driver's license, right? They can turn me away.
Mm-hmm.
This is some of the biggest bullshit I've ever dealt with. Like, this is insane.
It all is.
It's what's got me so frustrated and angry. So why do I have to follow the law and they don't?
Well, remember, we've talked about this on the show. I talked about this in my first book, Conservatives Guide to Winning Every Gun Control Argument.
Ka-ching.
Ka-ching. That gun laws, by and large, are not enforceable against the criminal class. So the biggest example of this is the machine gun registration requirement, that it's unlawful to own a machine gun in this country unless you have registered it with the ATF and gone through a background check and gotten the tax stamp for it, right? The courts have found that felons cannot be charged with being in possession of an unregistered machine gun because the act of registering it would violate their constitutional right to avoid self-incrimination. So lots of gun control laws work this way, where they cannot be applied to the criminal class because the act of complying with the law would be self-incrimination. It's just to catch us when we slip up, when we unknowingly do something wrong, right? That's what it's designed to catch.
Then why have the ATF? It's just designed to go after American citizens, not a bunch of illegal invaders, right? It's designed for criminals. It's designed to protect criminals. But if I was to just have a 15-inch barrel and something damaged it, right? And somebody at a gun store or ATF's there watching and they measure it, I'm liable for that. But if I had registered that in the first place, that's self-incrimination.
Yeah.
So that can be applied to me, but I'm not a criminal to start with. I'm not a felon to start with. Why have the ATF? Why is that even a thing? Why even have any background checks for anyone who wants to exercise their right to own a firearm? It's like saying, I need a license to go talk about Christianity on the street corner, right? I don't need that. That is my right.
Did you see what happened in Florida a couple weeks ago?
No, well, probably not.
A guy went in to buy a gun, and he passed his background check, and he was there to pick up his gun that he had ordered online, like Gunbroker or something like that. And it just so happened that when he showed up, there was an ATF inspector there. And the ATF inspector refused to let him pick up his gun because he said he smelled like he had smoked marijuana. ATF inspectors are not law enforcement agents. They're glorified bureaucrats. They're desk clerks just to make sure your paperwork is in order.
No enforcement power.
No enforcement. This guy forcibly stopped the transfer of a gun based on his own subjective interpretation that the guy smelled like marijuana. Now, maybe he did smoke marijuana, right? Maybe he was around someone who smoked marijuana and got a secondhand contact, right? Maybe he bought incense or candles or any of the other products that are out there for weirdos that like the smell of marijuana, designed to create the smell of marijuana. Yeah, right?
Or Colorado, or a growery, and you're like, you always smells like weed. It always smells like weed here.
Yeah, that was enough to literally shut him down and say, no, you can't pick up your gun. And yet now we're told that the ATF can do that, but the ATF can't restrict illegal aliens. Now I'm with you. I think that the ATF should be a convenience store. Alcohol, tobacco, firearms. It should not be a government agency.
Yeah.
Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, explosives. Yeah.
I'm fine with people not having stuff like hand grenades, right? But maybe an armed populace does need them. But like, I just don't want my neighbors to like leave a hand grenade behind somewhere, right? But that's a big difference between me walking into a store and trying to buy a gun and getting denied, right? It's like the ATF is arbitrarily picking who gets to have a weapon and who doesn't. And if they're restricting citizens and they're giving them to illegal invaders, well, who do they think has more rights in this country now? Who's in charge? Who doesn't have to walk around always worried that the law is going to come in and destroy you? Because they destroy you if they find like an illegal gun. They will get your whole life falls apart you are a felon. You can't vote anymore. You'll never own a firearm again. If you're in one of those states that has civil forfeiture, right, they can find reasons to start going after your estate, right? They can go after bank accounts if they think it was associated with it. If you accidentally sold a gun without the proper paperwork, right? In some states, they could just destroy your life and they'll eat you up. You can't fight it back. They have endless money for which to do that. But yet,
There's a
an
guy in New
illegal
York.
ingredient just shows their stuff and they're fine.
A guy, I believe in New York, who just had a hobby of just making his own handguns. He's allowed to own a gun.
Yeah.
He went through all of the proper processes at the time, because he still had them after they changed the laws. They've arrested him and they're prosecuting him for ghost gun.
Right.
Ghost gun.
Biggest farce.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is a farce. And this is what I find really, really interesting. This was an Obama judge in Illinois that did this. These judges, these leftist judges, for years have had the strictest interpretation of the Second Amendment they could possibly have. They continue to have a strict interpretation when it comes to things like the assault weapon ban, magazine bans, right? They're still, like, anyone can go listen to the hearing that just happened in Maryland, and it's obscene. It's disgusting. You have appellate judges on the bench saying high caliber magazine, and they're talking about banning them. They know absolutely nothing, openly talking about, well, what do we need to do to help the state win? Like, flagrant misunderstanding of the law, of the Constitution. In Illinois, they've declared that AR-15s are substantially similar to M16s because they can fire at 1/3 the rate of fire than M16 can, which is not the standard. It's never been the standard in this country. How fast you pull the trigger. If that's the case, Jerry Michalak is a felon anytime he touches a gun.
Yeah, he's the world's most dangerous man.
Yeah,
And he can reload faster than most of us can breathe, right? That would just be pure insanity. I can move on a trigger, man. I can empty a magazine before you realize it. I can put those rounds in a really small spot. Is that a fully automatic weapon then? Because there are grease guns, like the old school World War II grease gun. It's got a firing rate. I watched Jerry Michalak shoot one on video, right? It was so slow he could go faster with his revolver, right?
Yeah.
And he actually ends up shooting it and looks back at the camera like, I can't believe this thing is this slow. So when does speed affect whether it's dangerous or not, or it's useful or not, or it's legal or not?
A Browning 50 caliber, fully automatic, anti-material rifle, right? The ones that they have the back of the Humvees. Anytime watch a movie, watch footage, it is slow firing.
Yeah.
Because it's such a big round, so much recoil.
You got to control
it. It is extremely slow. Yeah. So if we're living in a country where they can ban any gun that can be fired faster than any machine gun, every gun will be banned. Every gun will be banned because you can design a machine gun to fire incredibly slowly, right? Yeah. A machine gun isn't just to fire fast. It's that you only pull the trigger once, hold it down, it keeps firing.
Yeah.
Right? The speed at which it fires is not uniform at all. No, it's just the whole system is broken. Our gun control laws, terribly broken. Our immigration laws, terribly broken. And it always makes me kind of rub my chin a little bit that when these judges are finally forced to actually read the Second Amendment and do what the Second Amendment says, the cases that they have an absolutist interpretation of the Second Amendment always seem to be give the felons the guns, give the illegal aliens the guns. Give the drug addicts the guns. Give the mentally ill the guns, right? They're still like screaming, shouting, being dragged, kicking and screaming at allow law-abiding citizens to own the guns. They can't handle that. But when it comes to the felons, when it comes to the drug addicts, when it comes to the illegal aliens, that's what they seem to want to prioritize in their originalist interpretation.
Arm the dangerous and unarm the citizen, right? And we always sit here, we're like, man, it's just too good. This stuff sounds so designed. It's too good to be true. They get what they want, right? And the more and more we see it, the more and more we've got to understand that somebody somewhere has pulled a string on this, right? They want us to be at each other's throats. They want a population who is replacing other populations to be just as armed, because if it comes to an armed conflict, which may be their goal, right? It's a war, right? And it becomes a forever war inside your own soil. And that
Yeah.
is highly probable if things continue, right? Because you're demonizing all the good people. What happens when they feel like they're pushed up against the wall? They're going to have to and will act, right? It's the only way a people would survive. So is this all by design? Are they trying to get us to just go after each other's throats? Are they trying to get us to fight each other? Are they trying to foment a bunch of really harsh feelings amongst people in the US?
Yeah.
So we beg for them to change things, right? We give them authority to go and do it. We give them a reason. They create the problem, right? The crisis is theirs, right? And they got to come up with, a reaction. They've got to think, oh my God, we've got to do something. Then the solution comes out. And that's just the goal. How do we get rid of the Constitution? It's another step.
Yeah. The problem with gun control laws and immigration laws to an extent has always been laziness and attempting to legislate with a broad brush.
Yeah.
One example would be like red flag laws. The Democrats, liberals, even some conservative or right of center people say we need red flag laws to make sure that domestic abusers aren't allowed to buy guns. Well, we'll go right back to 922G 9. You can't own a gun if you've been convicted in any court of a misdemeanor of crime of domestic violence. That is a disqualifier. So why do they demand red flag laws? Because they don't want to have to go through the process of prosecuting the domestic violence perpetrators. It's far easier to say, oh, you've been accused of it, therefore you're disarmed automatically. Right? The same with the mentally ill. The mentally ill, U.S. law already says you cannot have a gun if you've been adjudicated as mentally defective or have been committed to a mental institution. Now, committing someone to a mental institution long-term takes time, takes legwork, takes a lot of paperwork, right? Court hearings. It's a lot easier just to say, oh, the neighbor says he's crazy, we'll just take his guns away.
Yeah.
It's a problem of laziness. See, saying that all illegal aliens can't own guns in the United States, that's laziness. Because as we just talked about, the hypothetical I gave you of someone who's been in the United States, but visa lapsed one day, is he a felon because he still owns a gun into that one day? Well, under the law, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
That law shouldn't be written that way. The law should be written with the specificity that the American people really deserve. The problem is they don't want to treat illegal aliens, illegal immigration, as a criminal act. They want to treat it as a civil crime. Right? They want to just have it be a revolving door.
Is that why Texas is going to be so important then? Because they're trying to determine whether it's a civil versus a federal matter. Because if it's a federal crime, right, they would never be able to pass the any of the background checks that they put in per state. Like that would be really. Oh, it's all so touchy. There's so many what ifs that start coming up. Hey, and how many cultures do you know around the world that's very patrilineal and very patriarchal, where abuse of a woman is not just something that happens, but it's expected, right?
Yeah.
Have you dealt with cultures like that? And they are around the world, right? So,
yeah, I lived in the Middle East for a little bit.
Like there is some serious abuse of women out there, and it happens all the time when they cross the border, right? If they ever laid a hand on their spouse or their significant other, they would be guilty of such a thing, right? I mean, if they've ever had a domestic dispute and the police showed up, how would they record whether there was some sort of domestic issue, right? Because they're unregistered. You don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
They're undocumented. There would be no way to actually document the things they do.
Yeah. Well, Jane Doe kind of thing. But no, it's the whole thing's a mess, and it's designed to be a mess, right?
Yeah, right.
Like the solution is like, okay, if you don't want the illegal alien criminals to own guns, then charge them with crimes, right?
Yeah.
But these sanctuary cities refuse to do it. The Biden administration refuses to do it. They just want to rely on the whole, oh, well, they just can't have a gun anyway because they're illegal aliens, right? They just can't own a gun. They don't want to actually enforce the law. They're selectively enforcing that law. There was a big hubbub while we're talking about it. There's a big hubbub over the VA. So I think we talked about this when we were on our old show. For over a decade, the VA has been engaged in a really disgusting practice of convincing veterans that it's in their best interest to have one of their family members handle their affairs, like basically handle their benefits, make sure their checks get cashed, pick up their prescriptions, whatever.
Sure.
But the minute that a veteran checks a box, says, yes, it's okay if my spouse deposits my checks into the bank account. The minute they do that, they're automatically adjudicated as being mentally defective, and they can't own a gun anymore.
Wow.
That has been happening since 2004, 2005, 2006.
Yeah, I remember you talked about this.
End of the Bush administration really ramped up during the Obama administration.
It's shocking.
To the point where tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of veterans have been disarmed. Not because they're actually insane, but because they checked a box on a form to make it easier to have their benefits checks deposited and withdrawn and their prescriptions picked up, yada, yada, yada.
Wow. Talk about disarming those who know how to use them the best.
Congress just put into the omnibus kind of compromise spending bill, shutting this program down permanently. It kind of been on and off for years, shutting it down permanently now. Democrats are whining. They're complaining. So, oh, you're going to let the mentally ill own guns. They've already been adjudicated. No, they haven't been adjudicated. You just want to go the lazy way out because you want to disarm as many people as possible. There are plenty of people who check that box just because it's more convenient, right? It's literally the equivalent of adding someone else to a bank account.
Yeah.
Right? You're saying, yes, it would be helpful to have a family member, a caretaker, be able to pay my bills for me or deposit my checks. Literally just adding them to a bank account. But that was disqualifying. So you'll see over and over and over again, the Democrats whine, whether it's the red flag laws, right? Whether it's now with illegal aliens, they're trying to shove it in conservatives' face that you don't really care about the Second Amendment anymore. They just want to disarm as many people as possible. They don't want to do the hard work of making sure that really only the bad people get caught up in the dragnet. And that's the problem we face. And the dragnet is designed quite literally to get good people caught up in it.
Yeah. Wow, this is some of the most nefarious crap I've ever heard of, man. I mean, it's dirty. Imagine checking a box and then the proof that you're sane now isn't on them, it's on you.
Oh, yeah.
Right? How do you want to do that? You would have to go to a clinical psychologist, probably go through weeks of some sort of evaluations, right? And then you'd have to go before a judge, right? And then you've got to talk to the VA, and the VA is going to have to mount a case against you based on it, right? Who's had the money to fight this? Most of these VA people, they're good folks. They're not super rich like the rest of us or any of us, right? They are fighting for their financial lives most of the time. Are they going to be able to afford the super lawyer? Are they going to be able to just take time off work and go and fight for their rights? No, and they expect them to just roll over, right? The lawfare wins. The state is going after the very soldiers that protect it. So I don't have to go and do bad things in the night, right? That's why we have our soldiers.
The law says you have to have been adjudicated as a mental defective. Now, adjudicated, the root word of that is judgment, judge. You think a court, right? And that's where it would happen. You go before a court, and a court would hear evidence, a judge would hear evidence, and he'd make a decision. Him or her would make a determination one way or another. You appeal it, or you run out of appeals, right? What the VA did is they kind of worked around the court deal, and they created like boards of like inquiry, like panels that would examine a case and make the adjudication themselves.
That'd be deprivation of rights.
Well, they check the box, right? So the person checks the box. The panel basically rubber stamps the checking of the box. So, yep, he did it. Yep, he had a good reason to do it. And there you go. So that's how they've done the workaround. And then you get caught in this no man's land of how do you fight that when you've literally confessed, like the document that they hold is you confessing that you are, according to the law, mentally defective. How do you fight that? How do you fight that?
No, like you can never undo it. It's like medical records, right? Once
Yeah.
something is in a medical record, it stays there forever. And that's why the left always wanted to control healthcare, right? Because they want to make a lifelong medical record that follows you everywhere and it's universal. I mean, that's like the Nazis showed us that that's how you control a population, right? It always starts with going after their health records because you can record anything. Smoking,
Oh, for sure.
driving too fast, owning a firearm, right? Behaviors that might be strange, like riding a motorcycle, right? They can put all of these down in a record, and that's what they want. The moment that you put down that you may have been mentally defective or you were tricked into it, that becomes part of that permanent record, and it follows you forever. So how do you undo it?
Yeah.
I mean, you would have to spend more treasure than anybody has. I would never be able to fight something like this if it happened to me, right? I would just be too broke too fast. I would just roll over. That's what they're counting on.
That's what they're counting on. And there is a real, we started talking about illegal aliens, right? And so the left is celebrating. They hate the Second Amendment, but they love illegal aliens. So they're really torn on what they should say now. But it is quite interesting that today they are celebrating illegal aliens being allowed to own guns, which the reports are saying they're allowed to carry guns. That if they're truly an illegal alien without any form of like photo identification, every state I know of either requires a carry permit, or if they're constitutional carry, still require you to have a driver's license or a state issued ID card.
Sure.
Right? You still have to prove who you are, because the standard for constitutional permitless carry is if you're legally allowed to own a gun, you're legally allowed to carry a gun. How can any court or police officer verify that you're legally allowed to carry a gun, own a gun, if they don't know who you are, right? So I question whether that is ever going to really manifest, the carry portion of it. But it is interesting. Though? Yeah. It is interesting that the day that they are celebrating illegal aliens being allowed to own guns, they are crying out in terror at the idea of American veterans being allowed to own guns after their deployment ends and when they come back to civilian life. They want, I mean, you look at places like New Jersey, California, there are bills that circulate. If you ever want to see what the left is going towards, look at what's on the docket in these state legislatures, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey. They're usually the bills that don't get passed, right? But just look at what they are. A lot of them say, in order to get a gun permit, you have to first be seen by a mental health professional, by a psychiatrist, by a shrink. And they want, down the pike, they want the shrink to be able to sign off on whether you should or should not have a gun.
Wow, mental health, right? And your permanent health record, because that would follow you.
Yeah.
Right? Forever. And it can be, you can be adjudicated mentally defective like that. All you have to do is check a box. All you have to do is have someone say, oh, yeah, he's crazy. It would be that simple and that easy.
There have been studies where they've taken people who are completely sane and they've had them be seen by multiple psychiatrists, and they all have found something mentally wrong with them. But these people are completely sane. Yeah. And yet subjectively, one guy says, oh yeah, I sense some narcissism. Oh yeah. One guy in the study was labeled a psychopath, sociopath. By a guy he'd never met, talked to for an hour. He's like, what are you talking about, dude? So the left knows you put enough of these people in a psychiatrist's chair on their couch, and you tell the psychiatrist, yeah, this guy wants to own a gun. He's here for his gun evaluation, psychiatrist.
Yeah.
He's a gun nut. Psychiatrist, it's up to you to protect us all from him and his gun. Please don't get it wrong. Please err on the side of caution. Tell me, what mental illness does this guy have? Just tell us what it is and we'll stop him from getting a gun. This is the profession that you walk into a store, you walk into a pediatrician's office. I did in Colorado. I was ready to walk right out. Walked into my baby's first appointment. They give a checklist. They have to fill out like, oh, how has he been doing? And then there's questions for the parents. One of them was, do you have guns at home?
Yeah.
I'm looking at him. I said, My baby's a burrito. My baby was born 4 days ago. Literally, the baby's a burrito. We wrapped it up in a cloth. It doesn't move. Who are you to ask me this question?
Yes.
And I said, oh, well, we just ask everyone. I said, well, I'm not answering that question.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I think we know what the answer is then.
Yeah, I've heard that too. It happened at my appointment because they asked me, and this was just for like looking at a knee, right?
And you don't even have kids.
No. And that was one of the questions. Does your house have firearms? I said, I refused to answer that question. And she said almost the same thing. All right, well, I think I know what that means.
Yeah.
And I actually said to her, I was like, I don't think you do. And she kind of looked at me. There was a tense moment in that room.
Yeah.
But if they did mark that as yes, right, they just committed fraud. Because a refusal does not mean a denial. It just means I'm not answering that question. And I don't have to. That's the thing. And here's the kicker. If an illegal invader goes to a hospital, do they create a record on them? They don't even give them a real name.
Depends. Right? That's a whole other bit of fraud. Identity theft. Identity theft. When they go to the hospital under their stolen identity, what happens? It is. I'm waiting. I hope it doesn't happen, but I know it will. Where someone has their identity stolen and they die in the hospital because the medical records are wrong.
Oh,
and they have the wrong blood type. They had the wrong allergy information. They had the wrong pre-existing conditions because someone else had gone to the hospital a bunch of times under their alias and gotten their information added. It happens all the time with just regular identity theft.
Yeah.
When it's going to get tied to illegal immigration, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time.
And the hospital makes the case, well, it's not our job to collect information. But yet they do it so they can charge you. You know what I mean? Like, this is the biggest catch-22 on it, is that they have to record this information. They want it to be national, right? There's this big push to make all healthcare records national, so any hospital can log in and look at you, right? And you never, ever go for that, but because it'll just register you. But they would never be able. Nothing will ever be able to go away for you. This will haunt you until your days end, right? Your days could end, and you could still be alive. Now, imagine that you're being told that you're dead on paper.
Yeah.
And you can't open a bank account. You can't buy a gun. Your IDs don't work anymore because it doesn't prove it's you.
Yeah.
Like, the burden of proof falls on you, not the user. So why even give a name when you go to the doctor? Right? Yeah. Why even give a name when you go buy a gun?
Must be John Doe. Listen, I have friends who've worked in healthcare space with like electronic medical records, and in a decentralized, like non-government attached scenario, I can see the benefit of it, right? If I'm on vacation in Hawaii and I fall off a mountain, you wouldn't find
you know what I'm allergic to.
People have asked me to go hiking in Hawaii on mountains. I said, no, thank you. Not today. That's not how I die. Like, yeah, let's go mark up the volcano. Like, yeah, no, I've evolved past that.
You'll
like,
be fine.
That's like monkey stuff. That's like unevolved monkey stuff. Like, let's go into the fiery volcano. But in a scenario where I happen to be marching up to a volcano, I fall off the side of a mountain, I'm unconscious. They bring me to a hospital. They don't know my blood type right away.
Yeah.
They could find out quickly, but they generally, I'm O negative, so I'm a universal donor, but I can only take certain blood.
They love you.
Right? But I can only accept certain blood. But they don't know my pre-existing conditions. They don't know what medication I'm on, right? They don't know if I don't, but they don't know if I have a pacemaker or something, right?
They don't know anything, right?
They don't know anything. So there is a benefit in having your medical records there, especially when you're unconscious, right? The problem is that in a government where the fact checkers say it'll never happen, but we've seen it happen in places like Canada, the so-called death panels, whether they are or are not that, the idea that the government can tell you you're dying, but you can't get in to see a doctor yet. I'm sorry, I consider that to be a death panel. Whether it's like a right delayed is a right denied at that point. You hear it in the UK. People have cancer and they're not allowed to go see a doctor for their first appointment for months. Well, that could be the difference between life and death. They're coming to the United States for their initial appointment because they can't get in for 6 months. They could be dead by then, right?
Well, and then they can start
That's what scares me.
When it's too old for you to keep going, right? They could just decide at some point that just palliative care, let them die.
Yeah.
Or just that'll happen, right? I mean,
happens in the UK. Happens in the UK all the time with children who are born with congenital conditions. We hear about it all the time, where these babies have maybe a heart defect, And the family's like, okay, we're going to take them to the United States. There's a surgeon there who has cured a dozen of these cases. Really good odds of success. We think we can have a good quality of life. We can give her a good life. And the UK government says, no, you need to let your child die.
Yeah. Like who I would not like.
The fact checkers will say that's not a death panel. But what else do you call a group of people sitting at a table determining that someone needs to die rather than try to save them? That to me sounds like a death panel.
And what happens when they try to save that child and they face prosecution for doing so? Right?
What's happened?
So yeah, that's what I'm getting at. You no matter what, they will try to destroy you, right? There was that lady who had the kid with the heart defect. She went to, I think it was the Vatican, right? Allowed one of their surgeons to work on her. But when they left, they think they might have broken UK law on that because of the requirement to stay and let that child die, right? I mean, it's
there have been cases of these poor parents literally trying to sneak their kid out the back door of the hospital and cops being waiting there, laying in wait with the lights on their cars already on, waiting to arrest them. Right. Like at that point, really, you have nothing more important to do. UK, you don't need to deal with the grooming gangs in parts of your neighborhoods, right? Going after young girls. You don't have to deal with that. You don't have to deal with the out of control knife crime. No, you have to dedicate a dozen officers, multiple cruisers to arrest the parents who just want to give their child a chance at life.
Right.
It's twisted, warped priorities. But that's why I don't want the government to know anything about my medical records, right? Because inevitably, I don't know how far down the slippery slope you have to get, but the UK isn't able to issue that command unless the government has the authority to read into your medical records, right?
Right, and know what's going on. And so much so, if they're waiting, that means they're aware that you're doing it before. So they had to be investigating prior to that. So somebody's watching you. Like a Gestapo, right? Just waiting for you to say that one bad thing or do the one terrible thing to try to save your child's life, and they will beat the crap out of you to take you to jail if you resist. You know what I mean? The more you resist, the more they will come at you. Max, this is turning into it's a dystopia. That's what we live in.
Wild horses couldn't stop me from helping my children.
I would help you help your children. Yeah. Like if you that's one thing I would be willing to die on a hill for, right? And at some point, we've got to do that. We got to start deciding when to fight it all.
Yeah.
And we would try every day. That's why we have the show.
So, synopsis, do we end up agreeing a little bit? We went into this disagreeing more.
I know.
I know you don't like the idea of illegal aliens. I don't like the idea of illegal aliens having guns. But the solution is to prosecute them for their crimes.
Yeah. That's what...
Right.
Let's start with enforcing immigration law.
Yeah.
Let's start there. Yeah.
Enforcing immigration law. Yeah. Start there.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to be texting you later about it. Like, I don't know. Man.
It's tough.
Blah, blah, blah.
It's tough. But when you think about the guy who his visa lapsed one day, he's technically in the same boat. If you have a blanket rule, that guy technically is a felon now. And that's not right. Because realize that guy can have kids in the school. He could be on the PTO. Maybe he volunteers at the local soup kitchen. Definitionally, part of the people. No matter how you want to define the people, if he's a member of his community, he's part of the people, right? Yeah. Lapsing one day, the law should be more specific to ensure that he doesn't get lumped in with the cartel members waltzing across the border.
But that would require some... Yeah. Well, that would require common sense.
Yeah.
With politicians. So hold your breath on that one.
Not going to hold my breath because I like living. I would die. Yeah. I'm conscious. Well, let us know in the comments what you think. Are you an absolutist like me? Right? The people means people and illegal aliens are people. Or are you angry at this? Let us know. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious. Let us know in the comment section below what you think. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Any final words, Josh?
I think this is going to be the craziest March Madness, and there will be a Cinderella that comes out of this and wins the big one. That's what I'm hoping for.
Not Virginia. Thursday. Did you watch that game last night?
No, what happened?
That was disgusting. Virginia
went
like
isn't it? Yeah.
Virginia went against Colorado State, or Colorado State.
Yeah.
Or which one's the Ram? Which one's the Green?
That's Colorado State. Yeah,
Colorado State. Yeah, they went up against Colorado State last night, and Virginia lost. Colorado State won, so they're in. That was a win and you're in game. But Virginia didn't score a point for like 9.5 minutes. Unheard of. And they were one of the teams that was like, wait, St. John's is putting up 90 points a game, beat UConn, right? Beat all these great schools, and St. John's is out, but you put Virginia in, and Virginia didn't score a point for 9.5 minutes. Bad luck. Listen, I follow Boston College and Villanova. They both were out.
Yeah.
BC won their NIT game, knocked off Providence, which was a good win. So we'll see. They might be a Cinderella story in the NIT, but we'll see.
That's what I want to see. Cinderella story. Give me something new. Screw the people in Vegas.
I don't have cable, so it's going to get expensive for me to watch this game.
You'll find a way.
Because I got to go to the bar.
You'll find a way.
I'll find a way. Life finds a way. Well, that's it for this edition of the podcast. If you like the podcast, subscribe. Hit that subscribe, follow button down below. Comment. Give us a thumbs up, like. If you enjoy the show, share it with your friends. Really do appreciate it as we try and grow it. That's it for this edition of the podcast. My name is Max McGuire.
I'm Josh Hammerling.
Remember, everyone, the fight to take back our country is not over yet, but the only way we win is if we all stand and fight together. See you next time.
See ya.